Combathletes all over the world, welcome to another video where we're going to help you with your combat sports performance. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, welcome. Make sure you subscribe. If you're watching this in the Skool group Combathletes Worldwide, congratulations. You are now part of the best combat sports community in the world. And it's my job to help as many of you as possible. That's why I started the group. So you're going to get loads of free value, loads of help with your combat sports performance. My name is Coach Harry. In my day job running Combathlete, I work with amateur and professional combat sports athletes all over the world, and I help them train pain-free, build strength, weaponize their gas tanks, all without spending endless hours in the weight room. Today, we're going to talk about how to structure your training week. Make sure, if you haven't already followed as well, the Combathlete Arena Instagram page, that you go and do so. There'll be updates there every single day and high-value tips that you can use with your strength and conditioning, not to mention a behind-the-scenes look on what courses we're creating to help you guys out. So how to structure your training week. This is really important, and we're going to go through all the principles and all the things that we can implement to help you with this for consistent training and getting real results. Lots of you have asked for this as a topic. It's something that you struggle with. So I'm going to help you as best I can. And you're going to want to sit down, take notes and get stuck in, because there's loads of really useful stuff in here. So let's talk about what you need to know and a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover in this video. Okay, because this is some really, really important stuff. And if you don't know this, you're winging it, basically. And as I've coached combat sports athletes over the years, I've realized that such a large proportion of combat sports athletes are just winging it when it comes to structuring their training weeks. And if you start structuring your training weeks properly, you're going to have a massive advantage over your competition. It's as simple as that. We're going to cover today then maximal recoverable volume, what that means, how you can implement it and why it's going to help you. We're going to look at workload tracking. This is huge. Not enough of the combat sports community do this, but if you do, it sets you up for success and consistent training, longevity, and you don't have to miss out on skill development sessions. And then the infamous and all useful high-low structure, how to structure your weeks using this framework, what it means, and how to implement it today after watching this video. So, maximal recoverable volume. What does it mean? Okay, it's really simple. How much can you recover from each week? It's not how much you can do. Combat sports athletes are notorious for pushing themselves to the limit and really being able to do an insane amount of work when pushed or when needed. But it's not about that. It's what you can recover from. Recovery is the other side of the coin to work. Okay, work is important. We need to do it. That's how we build skills and that's how we get better. But really, the adaptations come from recovery. So how much can you recover from each week? How do you know how much work you're doing each week? Lots of people have no idea. When I speak to combat sports athletes every week, I ask them on the phone, how much work are you doing each week? Do you know? And often they can give me an intuitive answer, but they can't give me an objective figure or a number. The way that you discover how much work you're doing each week is with workload tracking. Okay? If you're not tracking, you're not managing and you're guessing. We're going to go more into workload tracking today as it relates to a principle. And then in another video, we're actually going to dive deeper into it in terms of the formula that we use and how you can set yourself up with various tracking methods to help you week to week. So how do you know if you're recovering properly? If maximal recoverable volume is the amount of work you can recover from each week, how do you know if you're recovering properly? I mean, there's two main ways really, objective and subjective. Daily heart rate variability tracking, that would be more of the objective measure where we use software, we use technology to help us. And we cross that with asking ourselves each day, how do I feel today? Okay, when I wake up in the morning, it's simple as asking myself, how do I feel? And once we have that data, how do I feel today? Or, yeah, okay. And then I look at my HRV and my HRV says, well, actually, you're fine and you're ready to go. That is what we cross over, and that helps inform our decisions and our answer to this question, are we recovering properly or not? Daily heart rate variability tracking then, what is it? So a lot of my athletes use the HRV for Training app, okay? And this app is really, really powerful because it measures your resting heart rate and your HRV. I should be getting an ambassador program affiliate code by the time this video comes out, because the amount of people I've sent towards this app is crazy. So guys, if you're watching from HRV for Training, get back to my emails, get me on the ambassador program, because I'm not getting paid to plug your product, but I do get all my athletes to use it because it's just fantastic. The reason this app is so good is you use the camera on the back of your phone to measure your HRV through your finger. You cover the camera with your finger and it takes the measurements, and it's actually really, really accurate. Heart rate variability is basically measuring the variations in between your heartbeats. There's more science to it than that, but that's essentially what it's doing. HRV for Training app is fantastic, but there's other wearables out there on the market that you can use as it relates to measuring this stuff. This is kind of an overview of the HRV for Training app, what it looks like. It's really, really well thought out. The guys behind it are some smart people, and it works really, really well for informing that decision or that question, am I recovering properly, in an objective sense? Usually when you measure HRV, you get three colours: red, yellow or green in the sense of the HRV for Training app, a bit of a traffic light system. This is what it looks like here, yeah, red, yellow or green, go ahead. So red, usually in the context of combat sports performance, I suggest to my athletes that you take a rest day, okay? You take the day off. Red is telling you that you need to take it easy. Yellow, it's kind of like, take it easy today. So I often prescribe steady state work, okay? Low intensity, anywhere from kind of 20, 30 minutes off feet. So the assault bike is my favorite. At a low heart rate, 130 BPM, working in kind of zone 2. That works really, really well for a take it easy day, or doing some robustness work. We prescribe robustness circuits to our combathletes. It works really, really well. It's considered a lower intensity training method as it relates to how it affects your nervous system. More on that later, but these are kind of what I prescribe on a take it easy day. And then if your HRV reads as green, it's time to proceed as normal with whatever you've got on the menu for your training that day. Now, not everyone has the budget to pay for HRV tracking. The beauty of the HRV for Training app is actually very, very affordable, which is why I send a lot of my athletes to it. Wearables can be much more expensive, but recently they're crafty, and what they've done is these subscription-based models where actually it can cost hundreds of dollars a year just to get readouts on your own information, which I get why they're doing it, but it's not the best if you're on a budget. So if you are on a budget, tracking your resting heart rate every day is a really good but old school method of seeing if you're overtraining, you're about to burn out, or potentially if there's some injuries lurking around the corner that you could avoid because you're just training too hard. Easiest way to track your heart rate on a budget: take a stopwatch on your phone, find your pulse with your index and your middle fingers, take your beats against 10 seconds, so how many beats do you get in 10 seconds, multiply that answer by 6 to get beats per minute, and do that 3 times, and then take an average of those 3 readings, and you'll get a pretty good reading of your resting heart rate that day. Now, the time to do that measurement is first thing in the morning when you wake up and you're still lying in bed. If you get up and you move around and you have a coffee, it's going to affect those readings negatively. So we want it to be a reliable reading. So do it whilst you're still lying down. As soon as your alarm goes off, roll over, switch off the alarm, and then go through that procedure that I just mentioned. And do this every single day. You can take an average across your 7 daily readings to give you a rough idea of what's going on each week. What you want to look for in that data is spikes or dips in the numbers. Usually if your heart rate is spiking or dipping, as we'll see in a second, it means you're not recovering properly and something needs to change. Here's an example from one of my athletes of the resting heart rate that we've been tracking. If we look at the bottom axes here, you can see the scale is kind of over 5 months worth. So there's a lot of weekly readings that have gone into this. And this axis here is the beats per minute. So average, this athlete is in the kind of 50 to 52 range of resting heart rate each day, which is great. Sub 60 is what we try and get our combathletes to when they sign up with us. However, you can see there's a dip here down to the 46s, which is an anomalous reading. It doesn't marry up to the pattern. And this is because this is where the athlete got sick. This is where they caught a cold, and it's reflected here in the resting heart rate. This spike here is actually when we went into a camp and the workload not suddenly got a lot more, but we increased it significantly. In general, we try and avoid workload spikes of more than about 10%. This was about a 15% workload spike, and you can see it's reflected in the resting heart rate. And just as an aside to that, If you do spike your workload more than about 30%, the data shows, the research shows, injuries are just around the corner. So we tried to spike this in a sensible amount as camp started, and you can see it's reflected in the resting heart rate. Here you can see it's evening back out to about 53 beats per minute, and this was kind of the new baseline for camp with that increased workload. So it's well worth tracking resting heart rate. This is how it can help you kind of nip things in the bud ahead of time. So ask yourself, when it comes to tracking your HRV, how do I feel? Okay. Obviously what the HRV is telling you is one thing, but you are the authority on your body. And so asking yourself in the morning, how do I feel today, is just as important. The data shows that that qualitative questioning is actually very, very accurate when you're asking yourself about yourself. Surprise, surprise. So an analogy here is the map is not the territory. Okay. The numbers don't always match how you feel. I have athletes that get yellow readouts like this, and they're like, but I feel great. What should I do? I get athletes that have green readouts, and they're like, man, I feel like crap. What should I do? You always have to marry up the two, is what I'm saying. Okay, workload tracking then. This is another really, really important part on understanding how to structure your training weeks effectively. Remember, guys, what you can track, you can manage. If you're not tracking, you're guessing, okay? With workload tracking, you want to do it every single day, okay? So you want to track your skills, okay? And in another video, we'll dive into more on how we do this. You want to be tracking how much strength and conditioning you're doing. If you have a physical day job, that's really, really important. Unless you're in the top 0.1% of combat athletes in the world that are earning, hundreds of thousands of dollars for their work, most people have got a day job. And if you've got a physical day job, right? If you're a plumber or a carpenter or a landscaper, that workload is significant as it relates to your total workload for a week. So you've got to think about these things as it relates to how you structure your week and how consistent you can be and how sustainable your weeks can be. And then recovery. We do all of these with our Combathletes. We track all of these things. Recovery, we're not so much tracking it for the sake of the workload component because it's recovery, so there shouldn't really be much work involved. We're tracking it more to see how the body responds, and then we repeat the methods that work for our athletes because it seems to be quite an individual thing. Here's an example of then what the workload tracking looks like. Okay, this is a snapshot taken from one of my athletes across a month, and you can see there's red and blue bars, and sometimes there's red and blue bars on the same day. That just means work done in the AM and the PM. Okay, we do track morning and afternoon. So this is what it looks like when you track it and you get a month's worth of readouts. High-low structure then, another principle you've got to understand as it relates to structuring your training week. This is huge. This came from Charlie Francis back in kind of the 80s from the athletics sprinting world. We've adapted it now for combat sports performance. It works really, really well. It basically means you alternate high-intensity days with low-intensity days. And by intensity, we're defining that, or that means the effect the training is having on your central nervous system. High-intensity days have a grave and a serious effect on the central nervous system, and they take more recovery. And low-intensity days don't have a strong effect on your central nervous system, and they basically don't really need you to recover from them. They almost are recovery in some senses. Not always, but the effect on the nervous system is much, much less. You need to know then what constitutes a high-intensity day and what constitutes a low-intensity day, or what activity constitutes high intensity and what activity constitutes low. So let's have a look. As it relates to a screenshot then of your workloads, if I just change the color here of my pen on the screen, you can see the days are alternating high and low. Okay, so here we would kind of have a medium day, low intensity, high intensity, low intensity, high intensity morning and afternoon stacked, medium intensity, rest. You get the idea. So there's undulation on these readings. Everything is not all high intensity. You don't just see a block of red bars on there. And then conversely, everything is not super low intensity, where you're training with such little intensity you're not getting any adaptations at all. We need a mix. So what the graph should read when you log this stuff is kind of these spikes and drops, spikes and drops. Okay, so that's how it looks on a workload tracking graph. Now, here's a really useful table. You can screenshot this or write this down. This is how you can differentiate which activities are high intensity and low intensity. Let's have a look at the high intensity side first. So hard sparring it's going to be high intensity, okay? Sparring is catabolic in nature. It breaks the body down when it's done, for a significant amount of time. So it's high intensity. It affects the nervous system. You need to recover from hard sparring, okay? Lifting weights over 80% of your 1 rep max. So very often when it comes to the Combathlete side of things, with the way that we program, and if you watched the last video, how to structure your training year, you would have seen the 5-3 fight method and how we structure for in-season when there's something booked in the calendar, and off-season. When it comes to our max strength phase, we emphasize lifting heavy weights above 80% of our 1 rep max. And that is going to have a high intensity effect on the nervous system. You're going to need to recover from that, okay? Max effort conditioning as well. Your 30-second sprints, 20-second sprints, these also have a high intensity effect on the nervous system, okay? They are difficult. It takes all of your effort, hence the name. So you got to respect that as it relates to recovery. Competition, okay? Competing is high intensity in nature. Whether you have an easy run in a tournament and you get the gold medal, or it's an absolute series of wars to get there, it doesn't matter. The emotional arousal and the nervous system arousal that it takes to compete means that it's high intensity. So anytime that you're competing, make sure you kind of log it on your training tracking as a high intensity day. Max effort throws and plyometrics. In the plyometric sense, it's what we call intensive plyos. These are high intensity activities. Throwing medicine balls as hard as you can. This is high intensity, okay? There is a recovery cost that needs to, come at the expense of this. Training with emotional intensity in general, okay? So if you're setting like a new 1 rep max or a 3 rep max or something like that, the emotion behind that is going to be high intensity, okay? Any time that you're kind of biting down in the weight room and really pushing is high intensity. And then this one's really, really important. If you're going to do lifting and skills on the same day, which is what we call stacking, and we'll go into that more in a minute, that's going to basically mean that day is high intensity day, okay? Doing a double session of lifting and skills. Okay, let's look in this column over here then at the lower intensity side of things. What constitutes lower intensity? So depending on how you like to learn, if you're a fan of the kind of constraints-led technical drilling, might not be your favorite. But regardless, going through the motions, Dutch kickboxing drills, for example, technique in jiu-jitsu, this stuff is low intensity. Okay, it doesn't really have a huge toll on the nervous system. Lifting weights under 80% of your 1RM. Okay, it's not as brutal for the nervous system. Usually if you're in that kind of 65 to 70, maybe even 75% of your 1RM, you're in the hypertrophy range. If you're doing sets of, 8 to 12 reps, that kind of territory, that's less stressful on the nervous system in general. It's under that 80% threshold, basically, is less intense. Low volume aerobic conditioning. Okay, so your steady state work, yeah? Keeping your heart rate in that 130 to 140 kind of zone 2 area, 20 to 60 minutes even. It's still quite low intensity for the nervous system. Upper body hypertrophy work, okay? Any upper body lifts, they're less taxing for the nervous system than total body lifts. So they would be considered lower intensity for the nervous system. Mobility and stability work, okay? Any work on, end range work for your joints, any stability work, robustness circuits that we prescribe our combathletes all the time. This stuff is lower intensity. Light jumps and throws, okay? So as it relates to plyos, this would be your more extensive plyometrics. These aren't as spicy on the nervous system. And then any active recovery work in general. It could be, easy restorative yoga sessions, it could be going for long walks, easy swims, this kind of stuff is active recovery. It's lower intensity. So this table will really help you categorize your training week with the current outputs that you have, the current sessions that you do. And then once you can categorize it, you can start to organize it into a high-low structure and get a bit more out of, your training week. Let's talk about stacking then. This is really, really important. Stacking is putting 2 high-intensity sessions together on the same day, and then following that with a lower intensity day or a rest day. So for example, your high intensity day might be hard sparring, okay, that might be in the morning, for example, and then in the afternoon, strength and conditioning, where, it has a max strength focus, for example, and you're going to be lifting weights at 80% or above your 1 rep max. That will be a high intensity day. That's going to have a high toll on the nervous system. So the smart thing to do is the next day is follow it with a lower intensity day, so some active recovery. You might even want to take a complete rest as well. That would be warranted. But active recovery would be the sensible modality to put in the following day after a stacked day. We use stacking all the time with our Combathletes. Lots of our guys respond really, really well to this method, especially our pros that are doing a high volume of skills per week. Stacking can really help organize the training week and really maximize the recovery where we need it. Average weekly structures then, okay? So in my experience, this is kind of the bare minimum that you need to be thinking about as it relates to what you should be implementing in your training week. We want 2 strength and conditioning sessions per week on average, okay? If you're doing a strength endurance and kind of GPP phase 1 in the 5-3 fight method, especially as it relates to a 12-week camp, you're going to be doing maybe 3 sessions per week. But that's because the RPEs of each session are quite low and we can do 3. It's at the start of camp, calories are quite high, technical skill demand is quite low, so we can do that. But on average, guys, you're going to want 2 strength and conditioning sessions per week. If you're only doing 1 S&C session per week, it's probably because you're a wrestler or you're in season and you've got lots of competitions coming. But in general, 2 is what you need to get some adaptations or at least to maintain where you're at. And remember, it's S and C. So in this kind of portion is a conditioning session for each as well. So there's 2 strength and 2 conditioning there. Most of our programming includes a conditioning block at the end of strength work. It doesn't always work like that for every athlete, but there's a conditioning component there as well. Okay, so 2 S&C per week. 1 aerobic session per week. It's interesting when you look, especially at MMA fighters, with energy systems development, what they need to work on or what they don't do very much of. It's aerobic zone 2 steady state work. Okay. So 1 session per week, 20 to 60 minutes, heart rate 130 to 150 BPM, off feet usually. So I often prescribe the assault bike, but it could be static bike, it could be rowing machine, it could be, elliptical if you're feeling really banged up. 1 of those sessions per week works really, really well. It just keeps everything ticking along. It keeps the aerobic base at a decent level so that we can recover between sessions, recover between sets as it relates to strength work, and recover properly each week to week as well. So 1 aerobic session per week is highly advisable. And then 1 robustness session per week. This would be low intensity as well. Aerobic and robustness would come out as low intensity sessions. The robustness circuits we prescribe for our Combathletes work really, really well. 1 session per week, often with 3 different areas that are targeted for robustness, is plenty and works really, really well. And especially with Combathlete programming, we make the robustness session what we call modular or a bolt-on session. So the athlete can move that around in the week where they see fit and fitting it into their high-low structure. So when people ask me, what should I do each week? I don't know if I'm doing too much or too little. This should be at least your baseline. Okay. Again, it's a case by case basis, but this should be what you're aiming for, guys. What I've noticed then, the professionals that I work with, on average, they're running about 10 hours per week of skill development training. Okay, on average. Some of them are a bit more, some of them a bit less. It depends, again, on the athlete. But on average, this is what I see. These are guys and girls that are, competing as a professional. They may or may not have a day job, or the money they earn from fighting and their sponsorships keeps them afloat in terms of, their financial situation. This is what they're hitting each week. On the other end of that, with hobbyists that I work with as well, on the amateur kind of side of the spectrum, 2 to 6 hours per week of skills is normal. Okay, and again, it fluctuates person to person, but there is a difference. You'd expect professionals to be doing more work with their combat sport than a hobbyist would be. Okay, so that's what I see often. Useful principles then, you're going to want to write these down. This is what's going to help you get to work and start planning out your training weeks after you watch this video. Try, if you can, to lift after skills training. Okay, try to do that. The reason for that is skills come first. You want to be learning things as it relates to your combat sport when you're fresh. If you're doing your lifting before learning something, on the mats or in the cage or in the ring, you're not giving yourself the best chance to absorb that new knowledge and that new skill because you've blunted that by lifting before. So if you can, lift after skills training when you're planning out your week. If you can't do that for whatever reason, try and give yourself 8 hours after your lifting session before you go and do some skills. You're not going to be fully recovered in those 8 hours by any means, but it will give you a chance to, refuel rest and recoup before you then go into your skill sessions later that evening. And you'll at least be fresh enough for that session to take something on board. Don't be surprised, though, if you go into that skill session and you feel certain areas of your body start to tire or gas out faster than they normally would. It's because you lifted earlier that day. If you can perform your conditioning work after skills training, that's also a good idea. Same kind of reason. If you cook your legs doing some sprints before going into a boxing session, you can guarantee any footwork skill development you're doing in that boxing session is just going to be pretty much written off because you've already cooked your legs out. So a similar kind of idea, put your conditioning work after skills training if you can, or on a separate day. Okay, high intensity conditioning methods will take anywhere from 48 to 72 hours to fully recover from. So putting it on a separate day can work as well. You're going to have to look at your weekly structures to see where to put that, but in general, conditioning after skills. If you can keep your lower intensity sessions to an RPE 5 or 6 as a rough kind of guideline, that would be a really smart idea. There's nothing worse when someone plans, for example, an off-season upper hypertrophy day and it's supposed to be a lower intensity day and it comes out as an RPE 9 because they've just busted their ass balls to the wall, and then now we've just completely defeated the whole idea of high-low and it wasn't a lower intensity session at all. So as a guideline, RPE 5 to 6 is always going to be a more manageable intensity. Sometimes it'll be even lower than that. Some active recovery sessions, steady state might come out as an RPE 3 or an RPE 4. That's absolutely fine. The point being is lower intensity should be lower intensity. High intensity lifting sessions, try not to have it too much higher than an RPE 8. In off season, we can push this a little bit more if we're really chasing some adaptations, but RPE 8 at least means that we can recover from it within 48 to 72 hours. We can still get the adaptation, but you're not going to be so rinsed out that you can't go and do skill development. So RPE 8, another way of thinking that is leaving 2 reps left in the tank, can be a really useful principle or heuristic when it comes to your lifting sessions for your strength and conditioning. Sessions that are higher than an RPE 8, try and follow them with a rest day. Sometimes you're going to do skill development sessions that are brutal. Some sparring sessions, people are at an RPE 9, maybe even in 10, and you're absolutely exhausted. Sometimes you throw up in a bucket in a corner, right? It's max effort. It's smart to follow those days with a rest day. You can't do many of those days back to back before you get injured or you completely burn out. So if you do higher intensity sessions above RPE 8, have a rest, okay? Your body will get more out of that rest than trying to push again the following day. If you track your training for 1 month, you will see patterns, okay? When people send me their timetables a lot of the time, I ask them, have you actually run this timetable? Have you tested it? Have you tracked how you respond and recover to this timetable? Or is this just theory and fiction at this point? Track your training for a month, you'll see the patterns. If you don't track, guys, you can't manage it. Use that data to set up a realistic training week, okay? If you have a rough idea of a timetable you want to run, you must test it to see if it works, or just track what you're currently doing for 1 month and then look to where you can optimize based on what I've taught you in this video. There is no single optimal template, guys, for everybody. It's very individual. I don't have any one person that I coach that has the same timetable as another combathlete. It's all different and individual. These principles I'm teaching you apply to everyone I work with, but nobody's timetable is exactly the same. So you're going to have to do a bit of work yourselves in order to optimize here. Okay, there is not one template. That's it from me. Make sure you join the Skool group if you haven't already, Combathletes Worldwide. Just click join and then we'll get you in the group. You can click on the classroom tab where we're adding courses every week at the moment to give you some really good, valuable, skin in the game strength and conditioning knowledge that's going to help your combat sports performance. Like I say, I do this in my day job every single day working with people all over the world. And if you join the Skool group, you'll actually get access to a free performance call with me where we'll go through your training on the phone and I'll do my best to help you. I do believe a good coach can help change and influence the trajectory of a combat athlete's future with just one phone call. And that's what this phone call is for. So join the group, book a call with me. Let's have a chat. Make sure you follow Combathlete Arena on Instagram as well for any updates and any other tips that we put out there. Thanks for watching. If you could give this video a like, that'd be much appreciated, especially if it helped you. Let me know in the comments below with anything that you're struggling with as it relates to your strength and conditioning, and we'll try and put some more course material together for you. And then click subscribe as well so you don't miss out when we upload those courses. My name's Harry Davis. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.